In the early hours before dawn in Moscow, the Russian capital appeared calm. Streetlights illuminated largely empty avenues, and office towers stood ready for the start of the workday. At the same time, nearly 500 miles to the southwest in eastern Ukraine, three long-range 3A1196 Liuchi strike drones lifted off from concealed launch positions. There was no public announcement and no visible buildup. The drones turned northeast, committing to a flight path estimated at between 465 and 500 miles toward Moscow. According to the scenario described, the drones were configured for endurance rather than speed. Each carried a warhead valued in the tens of thousands of dollars and was mounted on an airframe costing significantly less than the interceptor missiles likely to engage it. The strike was presented not as a symbolic action, but as a deliberate deep penetration operation intended to cross multiple layers of Russian air defense. While the Liuchi drones advanced on a southern trajectory, a second axis of activity began along a northern corridor. From dispersed launch points, 30 UJ26 Beaver drones lifted into the air. They did not fly in tight formation. Instead, their flight geometry was spread across a wide area, creating multiple radar returns and complicating tracking. Russian radar stations along the Luhansk direction began registering contacts. Initial returns showed around 10 slow-moving, low-altitude signatures. Within minutes, that number increased to 18 and then 25. Indicating a coordinated swarm. A Buk M3 air defense battery northeast of Belgorod requested and received authorization to engage. 9 M317M interceptor missiles were launched in quick succession. These high-performance interceptors, each valued in the millions of dollars, targeted drones that cost a fraction of that amount. 6 Beaver drones were reportedly destroyed in rapid succession, with debris falling over frozen fields. On paper, the engagement appeared effective. However, radar screens continued to display additional incoming tracks. The remaining drones adjusted altitude and position, forcing Russian crews to continuously recalculate tracking priorities. Each interceptor launch reduced available inventory. Reload cycles required several minutes, during which the launcher could not contribute to active defense. As the Buk M3 battery cycled through its initial missiles, a second defensive layer was activated. A Pantsir S1 unit rotated toward the expanding swarm. Its twin 30mm cannons opened fire against drones flying below 1,000 feet. When some drones climbed beyond effective gun range, the system transitioned to missile mode. Multiple 57E6 surface-to-air missiles were launched. Each interceptor, valued in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, engaged airframes built at much lower cost. Several additional drones were destroyed mid-air. Farther east, a Tor M2 battery joined the engagement, firing vertically launched interceptors costing millions of dollars each. An S300 system powered up behind it, preparing long-range interceptors for higher-altitude threats. A Buk M radar complex tracked the increasingly congested airspace, while a Krasuka electronic warfare vehicle emitted jamming signals intended to disrupt drone navigation. By the time the first wave of Beaver drones thinned, the Buk M3 battery had entered a reload phase. Launcher rails that had been active moments earlier were temporarily empty. A transporter loader vehicle maneuvered into position, hydraulic arms preparing to insert fresh missile canisters. During this period, the Pantsir S1 adjusted to cover the gap, firing additional missiles as its own magazine diminished. 2 batteries farther east, including an S300 PM system and another Tor M2 unit, extended engagement ranges to 15 and then 20 miles. At those distances, interception probability decreases and radar resolution degrades. Supporting systems, including the Buk M radar and electronic warfare assets, continued operating at high intensity. As attention focused on the northern swarm and on inventory management, the original 3 Liuchi drones advanced along a quieter southern corridor. Flying at low altitude over winter terrain, they crossed the front line during a period when Russian defensive rhythm had shifted from active engagement to reload and logistical assessment. The northern swarm had drawn fire and resources, creating a temporary seam in coverage. The main strike package continued its approach toward Moscow. As Russian air defense units remained engaged with the northern swarm and ongoing reload cycles, the 3A1196 Liuchi long-range drones advanced deeper into central Russia. Flying at low altitude, only a few hundred feet above winter terrain, they followed a route that exploited imperfect radar overlap and shifting operator focus. Their gasoline engines maintained steady cruise speed designed for endurance over a distance of roughly 450 to 500 miles toward Moscow. Behind the immediate engagement zone, Russia's layered defense network remained operational. An S-400 battery positioned deeper inside central Russia stood on alert, representing an investment valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. MiG-31 interceptors were available to patrol potential approach corridors. Electronic warfare systems, including Krasuka units, continued broadcasting jamming signals intended to degrade satellite navigation and command links. However, these assets were not concentrated precisely over the corridor the Liuchi drones were using at that moment. As the drones moved further northeast, Fighter Command responded in accordance with standard doctrine. 4 Su-35 multi-role fighters were vectored into a patrol box along a projected approach lane. The aircraft adjusted altitude and widened radar search patterns, conducting controlled interception procedures rather than high-speed pursuit. Pilots were searching for faint, slow-moving returns that could indicate low-altitude drones. One Su-35's radar registered a weak and intermittent contact at medium range. The return was faint and inconsistent, appearing briefly before disappearing as the radar sweep shifted. The formation tightened to improve cross-angle detection. The contact flickered again, but did not provide a stable lock. Given the cluttered air picture and atmospheric conditions, the signal was assessed as possible, but not confirmed. The fighters adjusted course toward a secondary sector. Simultaneously, an R-330 Zhidal electronic warfare system intensified GPS interference in the region. Satellite navigation signals available to the incoming drones weakened and fluctuated. Under these degraded conditions, the drones shifted to inertial navigation, supported by onboard visual correction systems. The loss of consistent satellite lock increased the risk of cumulative error over long-distance flight. During this phase, one of the 3 Liuchi drones experienced a navigation fault. Its onboard processor misidentified a terrain feature, reportedly a river bend, as a confirmed waypoint. The system applied a course correction based on that incorrect match. Without live human intervention, the deviation expanded gradually. Minutes later, the drone impacted a hillside at cruise speed. There was no widely observed explosion and no public warning. Tracking data indicated the loss of one platform, leaving 2 drones continuing on course. Despite the presence of fighter patrols and ongoing electronic interference, the remaining drones stabilized along a contingency route preloaded before launch. Their altitude remained low to reduce radar exposure. Fuel consumption calculations shifted as the flight profile transitioned from endurance to terminal approach. With Moscow still ahead, mission parameters moved from penetration to execution. As the 2 surviving Liuchi drones approached the outer defensive perimeter of Moscow, they reduced altitude further, flying only a few hundred feet above ground level. Lower altitude limited detection time by long-range radar and reduced engagement windows for high-altitude interceptor systems. Remaining fuel mass decreased, marginally increasing speed as they entered their attack profiles. Moscow is protected by one of the densest air defense networks in the region. S-400 batteries, valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, provide long-range coverage. Pantsir S1 units, costing tens of millions, offer short-range protection. Interceptors deployed from these systems are priced in the millions per launch. Radar arrays maintain constant surveillance. However, defensive systems rely not only on equipment but also on prioritization of perceived threats. Attention across segments of the defensive grid remained partially oriented toward the earlier northern swarm. Reload cycles had altered the tempo of operations. Patrol boxes for fighter aircraft had shifted. Electronic warfare assets were actively emitting. Within this environment, the 2 drones exploited a narrow temporal gap. At approximately 10:35 a.m., the first Liuchi drone reached the upper skyline of Moscow. Seconds later, it struck the upper floors of a high-rise building, detonating on impact. Glass panels shattered outward, and sections of facade collapsed. Smoke rose above the structure into the late morning air. Moments after the first explosion, the second drone impacted a nearby section of reinforced structure, driving its payload into the building. 2 drones carrying warheads valued in the tens of thousands of dollars each had penetrated a defensive network whose components represent investments in the hundreds of millions. The sequence did not indicate a systemic collapse of radar coverage or a total failure of air defense. Instead, it reflected the cumulative effect of earlier engagements, interceptor expenditure, reload intervals, fighter repositioning, and electronic warfare saturation. Premium interceptors costing millions of dollars per launch had been fired against the northern swarm. Multiple batteries had entered reload phases. Engagement distances had stretched beyond optimal ranges. Fighter patrols had investigated intermittent returns under heavy clutter. In that compressed time frame, 2 autonomous systems reached their targets. The incident underscored the operational arithmetic of modern air defense. Each interceptor fired reduces immediate inventory. Each reload cycle introduces minutes of vulnerability. When multiple axes of pressure are applied simultaneously, defensive resources must be divided. In this case, a swarm of lower-cost drones drew significant defensive attention, while a smaller endurance package advanced through a less contested corridor. By late morning, smoke from the impacted high-rise was visible across parts of the city. Emergency services responded to the scene as air defense units reassessed posture and inventory levels. The event marked a deep strike reaching Moscow, illustrating the expanded geographic reach of unmanned systems operating over extended distances. Following the impacts in Moscow, emergency response protocols were activated across the affected district. Fire crews and medical teams were dispatched to the high-rise that sustained damage to its upper floors. Smoke continued to rise from shattered windows and damaged facade sections as authorities began assessing structural integrity and potential casualties. Officials moved to secure the perimeter, restricting access to surrounding streets, while first responders conducted initial inspections inside the building. Air defense units in and around Moscow shifted posture in the immediate aftermath. Systems that had been engaged earlier in the northern corridor reassessed interceptor inventories and readiness levels. Reload cycles were accelerated where possible. Radar operators widened scan sectors to detect any additional low-altitude contacts. Electronic warfare assets maintained jamming output, focusing on potential follow-on threats. Fighter patrol patterns were reviewed, with aircraft repositioned to cover additional approach corridors. Military analysts reviewing the sequence of events noted that the strike did not result from a complete breakdown of the defensive network. Long-range systems, including S-400 batteries, remained operational. Short-range Pantsir S1 units continued to guard key installations. Supporting radar complexes such as Buk M maintained airspace surveillance. However, the engagement pattern earlier in the morning had required multiple launches of high-value interceptors against the northern swarm of UJ26 Beaver drones. Each launch reduced available stockpiles and required time for reload. During the northern engagement, Buk M3 batteries fired M317M interceptors in rapid succession. Pantsir S1 units expended both cannon ammunition and 57 E-6 missiles. Tor M2 systems launched vertically fired interceptors, and S300 platforms prepared for extended-range shots. Electronic warfare vehicles, including Krasuka and R330 ZTEL systems, operated continuously to disrupt navigation signals. These actions reflected a layered defense, responding simultaneously across several axes. By the time the Liuchi drones approached Moscow, portions of the network were transitioning between active engagement and logistical recovery. Operators were conducting inventory checks, confirming remaining missile counts, and coordinating reload priorities. In such periods, even brief timing gaps can reduce immediate response capacity. According to the sequence described, 2 drones exploited that interval to reach the city. The cost contrast between offensive and defensive systems has drawn particular attention. The Liuchi drones reportedly carried warheads valued in the tens of thousands of dollars, mounted on relatively inexpensive airframes. In contrast, interceptor missiles from systems such as S300, S400, Buk M3, and Tor M2 are valued in the millions per shot. Pantsir S1 missiles cost hundreds of thousands each. Radar complexes and electronic warfare vehicles represent investments in the tens or hundreds of millions. The engagement required multiple interceptor launches before the main strike package arrived over Moscow. Security officials have not described the incident as a collapse of air defense coverage. Instead, it has been characterized as a demonstration of how simultaneous pressure across multiple sectors can stretch even dense layered systems. When resources are distributed to counter one axis of attack, coverage elsewhere may rely on reduced reaction time and remaining inventory. The earlier swarm functioned as a diversion, drawing interceptor fire and operational focus. The broader context reflects the evolving role of unmanned systems in the conflict. Long-range drones capable of flying several hundred miles now operate beyond traditional front lines. Endurance, navigation resilience, and coordinated timing allow such platforms to reach deep inside national territory. Distance is no longer defined solely by ground maneuver or artillery range, but by flight endurance and the ability to penetrate radar coverage for limited intervals. In the hours after the explosions, authorities in Moscow continued to evaluate damage. Structural engineers were expected to determine the extent of reinforcement impact and facade loss. Emergency crews remained on site while smoke gradually dissipated. Air defense units maintained heightened alert status, and electronic warfare emissions persisted across sectors considered vulnerable. The strike underscored operational arithmetic central to modern air defense planning. Each interceptor expended must be replaced. Each reload requires time. Each radar sector has limits in resolution and prioritization under cluttered conditions. When multiple autonomous systems approach from different directions, defensive commanders must allocate finite resources in real time. In this case, 2 drones reached their targets during a narrow window created by earlier engagements. As assessments continue, the event highlights the expanding reach of long-range drone operations and the challenges faced by layered defensive networks in managing simultaneous threats. The situation remains under review, with authorities focused on damage evaluation, system readiness, and potential adjustments to defensive posture. For continuing coverage and verified updates, follow our